Hi guys, I'm Louis, the producer and host of Uncharted Parenting and Programs and Parent Coordinator here at Encounter Youth. But most importantly, I'm a husband and I'm a dad to two boys as well. As you all know, parenting can be a wild adventure. It's full of that messy stuff, full of all of that unpredictable stuff, full of uncomfortable moments. But basically, it's uncharted territory. You're not alone though. And each week, we're going to have some amazing guests, some amazing professionals here on the podcast sharing tips, stories, and ideas to help you survive and thrive. And hopefully we have a couple of laughs along the way as well. So if you're ready to navigate the chaos of raising your young person with just a little bit of help, then welcome here to Uncharted Parenting. So, Lauren, thank you so much for joining us on Uncharted Parenting today. It's always such a pleasure to have someone to actually come into the office and to speak to and to have these conversations. And I'm really looking forward to diving into our topic today and diving into your book, Meltdown, as well. Mm-hmm. But before we do dive into everything, now I know that some people might know you from your role at the Advertiser, but you're normally doing what I'm doing,
yes.
Normally asking the questions rather than
have turned.
Yes, rather than answering them. But before we do dive in, do you mind giving us a bit of maybe an introduction to yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and how home life and stuff is as well for you?
Yeah, who am I and why am I fit to be on this podcast, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I am a mum of two. I have a 6-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. So we were just talking before about drop-offs, and in a couple of months we will have the dream scenario of one drop-off. They'll both be at school. That is the dream, isn't it? Yes, yeah. I am also a journo, as you mentioned. I have really never done anything else. I started at the Advertiser on my 18th birthday,
Wow.
So it was a Monday, and I went out with mum and dad for dinner that night and had one legal drink, and then I went to work again the next day. Yeah. But that was all I ever really wanted to do, and I got to that through a cadetship, which they still do at the Advertiser. So I'm not sure that they've taken a cadet straight out of school since. So I don't know whether to wear that as a badge of honour or if maybe that was a lesson learned. Yeah. But I'm still there. At the moment, my title, I'm education editor, which is obviously part of why we've crossed paths. And also social policy editor, which is more of your sort of child protection, family violence policy, mental health, NDIS, that sort of stuff. Okay. And parenting. Yeah.
Which is more.
Yes. And I'm 4 days a week at the moment, so I'm part-time, so you get a little bit of time at home with the kids too.
And in between all of that, you've managed to write a novel.
Yes, yeah. So this is my first book, yes. I'm not really ever sure quite how to describe it. It's kind of a memoir. It's kind of journalism. It's maybe a little bit self-help. It's my experience when I became a mum, but also I realised it was an experience that a lot of other people were having. And so as the journo in me was like, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk to other people about how they're feeling, and then like to interview experts about it as well. Although I have to give a shout out to my mum and to both sets of grandparents in our family, because this book would not have been written without grandparents.
They're the unsung heroes, aren't they, grandparents?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, well, they're plenty sung in this book. I definitely gave them their dues. But I was working 3 days a week at the Advertiser at the time that I was writing the book, and one day my parents and my partner's parents would help with pick up with like kindy or childcare. So yes, between childcare and grandparents, that is about the only way that this got done.
Wow. Where does it's not one of my questions I had for you today, Lauren, but where does this passion that you have for writing come from?
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to know because there's never really been anything else I've wanted to do. I am definitely not a numbers person. I feel like there might be two types of people in the world.
Yes.
Although it's really unfortunate because I didn't do maths in year 12 at school because I was like, I'm going to be a journalist. I don't need numbers. And then I spent 7 years covering state politics, where I covered a budget every year. And you're constantly looking at statistics and spreadsheets. So I would advise anyone who wants to be a journo, don't discount the numbers. They're increasingly important in a data journalism driven world. But I don't know. I mean, I see it with my kids now too. Like they love hearing stories and they love writing in their little notebooks and, making things up. And I think that perhaps if you foster that, which is probably what my parents did, you know, we did a lot of reading at home, then that's kind of just where I gravitated towards.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, maybe you've got a couple of little journos in the making at home.
I did. I took a couple of those tiny little notepads home from the office stationery supplies, which I'm sure they won't mind. So they wander around sometimes with their little
writing
notepads.
Notes.
Yeah.
Hopefully not writing notes about you and your husband.
That's it. Although I should stress, it's you know, the job that I have now is not necessarily making up stories, which I know that a lot of people can sometimes wonder about.
Yeah.
But I think the thing I like about journalism and why I was attracted to that as a day job is telling people stuff they don't know. That's essentially what the job is.
Yep.
Tell people stuff that they didn't know, or even better, that other people don't want them to know. Whether that's government, opposition, big corporations, you know. And yeah, when it boils down to it, that's why I like the job.
Yeah. Well, you're certainly doing a fantastic job, and I'd love to sort of dive into probably actually your career and what you do at the Advertiser a little bit more, but we're going to focus today on Meltdown and what's contained within Meltdown, the book. And we're going to dive into, first of all, so your book starts with this personal story that it comes from your perspective, and I can certainly relate to it as being the guilty party in that particular story, because I know for my wife will be able to back me up with that. But you describe a moment where you just got your daughter back to sleep, and for the purpose of the story, I don't think she was a good sleeper at that point in time.
No.
Right, and I think a lot of parents can relate to that as well. And your husband, who was asleep on the couch at the time, he was making his way back to bed, and he made a loud noise with the door handle. You'd just gotten your daughter back to sleep, and then she woke up again when she heard that noise. And
well, actually, it was me that woke up, and that was the issue. So
right.
the irony of this scenario is that she slept through the whole thing, which usually she would not have. And again, you've got lots of parents listening who might be familiar with the 4-month sleep progression that you have with babies. So she was bang on 4 months at this point, and had been going to bed sort of on average like at midnight, and then waking up quite regularly after that. And so, as you say, I had been trying to go to sleep next to her, having got her to sleep.
Yes, that's right.
But no, I mean, whether you wake the baby or you wake the mum, neither is a good scenario.
No, well, especially when you're dealing with sleep deprivation and things like that. And I totally understand where you're coming from. But you would then go on in the book to explain this feeling of, I guess, anger or rage that sort of rose to the surface. And I think a lot of mums can relate to that. And I guess that's why you've written this book, is so you can tell it from your own personal perspective. But there's probably a lot of mums out there that feel the same. And so I'd like to really hone in on that just to start with. So these small everyday moments that happen at home, whether it's out and about, they can trigger such overwhelming, I guess, this feeling of anger that sort of rises to the surface. Can you maybe dive into that for me a little bit more? Yeah,
well, so first of all, as a reminder, like the book is called Meltdown, and then it's why motherhood makes us angry and what to do about it. And I think that was what I wanted to know when I started writing the book, was why am I so angry as a mum? You know, this thing that I have desperately wanted my entire life. I always wanted kids, and I love them dearly. They're adorable, you know, which is probably helpful in the grand scheme of things.
It does help.
You know, and I would never have wanted anything else for my life. But at the same time, nobody warned me that this thing that I would so desperately want would also drive me absolutely mad. You know, we're getting better at talking about things like postnatal depression, or perinatal, I should say, because it can come on before the child arrives, and anxiety, you know, this worry, the sleep deprivation, and the baby blues. Like, my mum gave me great heads up about the baby blues, and so when they hit me like a ton of bricks in the hospital, I felt really out of sorts. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I went, oh, this is a thing, you know, someone's told me about it. I'll get through this. But anger was just not something that anyone really warned me about seriously. It was only ever in jest. So, you know, people would joke that they kind of wanted to abandon their children in the supermarket because they were having a tantrum, whatever, and isn't that funny? But no one had ever sat me down and said, hey, look, by the way, at some point you're probably going to want to throw a tantrum bigger than anything your kid's ever done, and that's normal. So when it happened, and you give this example, when my daughter was about 4 months old, was probably the first time I can really remember that feeling. you know, I was furious at being woken up. And my partner, you know, I mean, he's been a really good sport about this book. Like, you know, he's not done anything there that's ridiculous. He didn't slam the door. He didn't come upstairs singing at the top of his voice. You know, he just went to bed and like shut the door and it clicked into place. And I must have just been on the verge of sleep and it's woken me up. Yeah. But I was incandescent, you know, threw the sheets off, out of bed, stomping down the hallway. I turned the light on. At this point, I did not care if I woke our daughter. You know, I was so furious with him, and that feeling totally overtook me in a way that I don't really remember happening before kids. You know, I'll be very honest with you, I'm an impatient person and was like that before children, and I like to be in control and I like to be good at things, and all of that had sort of caused irritation or frustration before kids. But the thing that I realised is when you have kids, you are not in control of how you can regulate yourself all the time. So if you're not getting enough sleep and you don't have time to stop and rest or reset, and the relentlessness of parenting, then when that feeling bubbles up, you don't have the capacity to deal with it in a way that you might have pre-kids, hence the meltdown.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned something in there about, do you think it's that element of control in not having it? I know for me, in my own parenting journey is that feeling of, I mean, I like to have control of things in life like normally, and it's that element of non-control, I think, that contributes a lot to it. Yeah,
and I mean, that sounds, you know, like we don't want to say that every parent's being a control freak, but what it is that you're on someone else's timeline, and rightly so, you know, especially when kids are really little, they need you to meet their needs, their need for sleep, their need for a changed nappy, their need for food. But what all of the experts that I spoke to for the book said is that where anger usually comes from in parenting is actually our unmet needs. So, you know, we are putting children's needs ahead of ours, and again, mostly that's rightly so. But if you do that for too long and too often, then it starts to manifest in your own dysregulation. So when a kid throws a tantrum because they're tired and they're hungry, you know, and they haven't got what they want, that's basically what's happening to us as parents. It's just that we've probably got a higher threshold and we sort of keep going, and then all of a sudden you reach, as you say, that one little thing that in and of itself wouldn't be an issue, but it comes off the back of a series of unmet needs, and eventually your nervous system is just like, nope, it's meltdown time for mum.
And I think a lot of mums listening to this would definitely relate to that. And without trying to sound like Shannon Noel and say, what about me? But, you know, what about the dads in this scenario? You know, like, what part do they sort of play in this? And I know you discuss your husband in the book as well. But yeah, what sort of role do they play in this?
And I sort of encouraged you to bring this topic up, so I appreciate it, because it was really important for me writing a book about mum rage to address the what about the dads question, because I knew that I would get that. You know, dads are parenting and they are tired too, and they would get frustrated too. 1 in 5 or thereabouts Australian mums have some sort of perinatal mental health issue, but 1 in 10 dads do as well. You know, so I'm certainly not dismissing that. I think the kind of crux of this book for me, though, was about, as we talked about, that sequence of unmet needs, that's happening to the person who's spending the most time with the children. So if you are on shift, so to speak, with your kids more than your partner, then you are more likely to be putting their needs before your own more often. And to me, that's where the meltdowns come from. And so in Australia, the data is still very clear that is more often likely to be a mum in a 2-person heterosexual household, which is still the majority of Australian households. There's a series of data that makes it sort of depressingly clear that not a lot has changed. And I don't want to bombard you with figures, but some of the ones that really stood out to me is that there's only 3 or 4% of households that have a stay-at-home dad, and there used to be about 1/3 of households that had a stay-at-home mum. And that's gone down to about 1/4 now, because more and more families are having to have dual income. But then there are still far fewer dads who are working part-time. So if you need a dual income, it's almost always mum who's doing the part-time and spending more time with the kids. It's only about 10% of dads that do part-time. So when we say, what about the dads? The data kind of tells us that the dads aren't necessarily having that sequence of relentless need from a child and their own unmet needs as much as mums in your average Australian household.
It's interesting that there's been this movement about, particularly around, especially for women getting back into work post having children, and I think it's interesting that I feel like it's slowly changed a little bit over time, even in the time that I've been in full-time employment, but it's still, obviously the statistics still tell us that it's not the case, really.
I think the thing is that dads, the research showed me that dads change their work in different ways. So whereas mums will go to that formal part-time structure, more dads were talking about trying to do flexi work. Yep. So they might stop to do a school pickup, but then they're still working, they're going back to the laptop later at night.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's still this real reluctance, and I don't know whether it's on the part of the dads or it's on the part of the employers to have that formal, I would like to request part-time hours. They're sort of trying to fit it in around, because dads are doing more. There's a lot of data that show that dads are spending more time with children now than in decades gone past, and that's certainly true in my household. I mean, we were talking before, my partner does most of the drop-offs in the morning because he's working from home. So that's more how dads are trying to work in that flexibility, rather than the sort of structural ways that have happened for mums for a lot longer.
It is very interesting, and there's so many different factors involved in that, isn't there? Is there your employer? I know for me and my wife that we sat down before we had kids and discussed, what sort of, roles that we would like to play. And I think that probably happens in majority of households, is you sit down, you have that discussion. But yeah, it's definitely very interesting. I'd love to sort of dive into that a little bit more.
I do wonder if all households have that discussion, because I think part of what's happening here is a bit of a default. Like maybe there are some households where it's just assumed it's not actually a discussion, because if you're coming to a family through pregnancy and you're having a baby, you'd be eligible for parental leave if you've been working, and the numbers showed that it's like 95% of people who take paid parental leave are mums, and I think that is what really starts that default, because then mum's home and it's her quote unquote job to be looking after the kids. She's literally getting paid for that for a while with that paid parental leave. And I think that just sort of sets up a set of dominoes in a family that means that maybe we don't question the defaults. And it's great to hear that you are having those conversations. But I think for a lot, it's easy to sort of fall into that, oh, okay, well, mum's home looking after the kids. And then, as it was put to me by the experts, the pattern in Australia is more likely then that she might go back to work, but part-time, and then there we are. One of the other stats that I just absolutely loved was research about 4 and 5-year-olds. And I reckon I had a 4 and 5-year-old at the time that I found this, and it was saying that dads are spending more time with kids that age, but children are at all times more likely to be with mum than with dad. At all times. So even when dads were spending more time, quite often mum was there too. So it was like weekend time and you were crossing over together. And I think for me that really solidified, like, why are we talking about mum rage? That's why. Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely, I think, a worthwhile topic to be speaking about. And you write candidly in the book about these raw, often unspoken about emotions that particularly mothers experience. We've just discussed that all parents do feel them, but it's especially you dive into this feeling of anger that's directed sometimes at partners, sometimes at children, but and maybe even themselves, to like anger towards themselves for or this shame about feeling that feeling. Why do you think? Because it's still a little bit taboo, isn't it, to even be speaking about this sort of topic that we're talking about now, and what do you think is stopping mums from even talking about it in the first place? Yeah, well, and I had to sort of get over that in order to write a whole book about it, right? It wasn't something that I just one day thought, I'm going to do this, and then the next day had the confidence to do it. There is still a lot of shame around, as I said earlier, like admitting that something that you so desperately wanted makes you angry, and even if you've come to parenting, you're a bit on the fence about it, like you don't have to have desperately wanted it to feel that shame once you've got it. It's funny because anger in our society is not a feminine emotion. It's not really associated as a good thing with women, whereas it can sometimes be, and I think this is becoming less, but it can sometimes be associated as a good thing for men.
Yeah, a masculine thing, or
because it shows dominance and you know, as long as it's not to the point of abuse, you know, a bit of kind of putting your foot down is often seen as something that's good that dads do, you know, in commas. So it's not a feminine emotion, and anger's also not a particularly sympathetic emotion. So if you're overwhelmed and you're crying, because parenting's got the worst of you, that will elicit empathy from people. You know, they'll want to come towards you and try and help. Whereas if you're ranting and raving, you know, as I've been known to do, it's a lot harder to sort of go towards somebody who's behaving like that. It can be quite off-putting. And the sad thing is that it's like coming from the same place. You know, you're struggling with parenting. It's just how it's coming out of you. And so I think for all of those reasons, mums perhaps keep that inside because they don't want to look like they're not feminine, or they're not motherly, or they're not fit, they're not coping. Because then the other issue with anger, and I think maybe we're going to talk about this later, but is that it's also still very closely linked with aggression. So being angry is not actually the same as acting on that anger. We are going to speak about that a bit later. I do have a question for you a bit later. And so only to note here that I think that's another reason that it's still taboo, is because if you worry that you're admitting to feeling angry is going to make people wonder, like, what are you doing to your kids then? You know, then they might want to take your kids away, and like, who's going to admit to that? So I think for all those reasons, as you say, it absolutely is still taboo.
I'd be interested whether you'd be willing, Lauren, to actually share maybe with our audience in how maybe you overcame something like that in order to write a book about it. You know, how did you navigate that? Well, in the way I overcame it is, I hope, what people will also get from the book. So putting my journo hat on, when I decided I was going to write the book, I was like, am I the only one? Because if I am, then I've got to do some work, you know. But if I'm not, then maybe that will give me a bit more confidence to sort of talk to other people about it. And I am absolutely not the only one. So I did a survey for the book where there was about 200 mums at the time who responded. I called them great. And it's only a small, you know, it's not sort of a nationwide. Well, actually, it's women from all over Australia, but it's obviously a bit of a random sample. But 200 women who I asked a series of questions about anger and motherhood, and only 4 said they did not experience anger. So 97% said yes. Pretty overwhelming.
And that in and of itself, I think, should make us all feel a bit better. We're not alone, and if you wanted to open up a conversation with another mum, chances are they would probably resonate with it, you know, which I think that's the reticence at the moment, is like, oh, can I trust this person to kind of let this
to open up about it and speak about it. And I think you also, in the book, you explore the physical side of things, the psychological side of things, but also the societal pressures that contribute to that feeling. That, I know we're calling it mum rage, but a parent rage. And, you know, which do you think, out of those 3 factors that I just said, so it's physical, psychological, and societal, do you think there is maybe one that stands out the most, or do you think they all contribute in their own right?
It's certainly going to be different for different mums. Like, it'll depend on your position in society, for example, your level of education and income and family support. I think for me, where it started with the research for the book was physical, because I know that sleep deprivation was a huge trigger for me. And I wanted to know more about why. And so I spoke to some sleep experts in Adelaide at Flinders University who talked to me about what's actually going on in my brain when I'm not getting enough sleep. And that was actually really validating, because I think a lot of people just think, for new parents, mums and dads, you're sleep deprived, like, get over it. They'll sleep eventually, you know, and they will eventually. Happened to me last night. But it doesn't mean that it's not absolute torture while it's happening. And I think it's pretty easy to gloss over that. But what made me feel a lot better was that the people who study this for a living were telling me that if you are getting interrupted sleep, you're not getting those full sleep cycles, then, as just one example, you're not dreaming as much as you might otherwise.
Yep.
And dreaming can help you to process emotions. That's one of its purposes. And so if you're constantly not getting to that point in the sleep cycle, then you're waking up the next day and you kind of haven't dealt with, subconsciously what happened the day before.
Those emotions.
Yeah, so of course you're going to be a bit more on edge. And the other thing they told me was that the front of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, without getting too technical, the bit that basically stops us from doing things we might regret later, that bit of your brain needs the most rest out of the whole brain to function properly. So again, if that's the first thing that's going when you've lost sleep, then the next day when you're trying to stop yourself from losing it because a kid won't put on their shoes, if that part of your brain hasn't had enough rest, that's going to be much harder. So for me, I started with the physical because I felt like if I could get some of that under control, then I would maybe have the energy and the bandwidth to deal with some of the more structural stuff about whether I felt that things were equal in our household as far as who was pulling their weight, or juggling my paid work and my home life. I
think sometimes, I think it's the same in a lot of different ways. Is sometimes we deal with the physical stuff first, and we're only now just discovering as a society that, actually maybe there's stuff going on underneath the surface that isn't physical, and we're talking about it more now, and those psychological pressures and things like that. So it's certainly very interesting.
Absolutely, and it is a bit of a vicious cycle because some of the structural stuff is what's meaning that I was getting less sleep. For example, structurally, I was the mum who took the paid parental leave and stayed home, and because I was able to breastfeed, which I wanted to do, that in our household set up a default that I was the one that got up in the middle of the night. So those structural reasons were why I was losing sleep. And then losing sleep meant I had less energy to have a conversation with my partner about, do you want to do a bottle feed in the middle of the night? Because, it all felt too hard.
And I think as well as parents, and, in our own parenting journey, myself and my partner, we're still dealing with this now, is there's that, how can we look after each other and how can we still be present enough to be good parents, but also still get our own needs met. And it's a journey for sure. I think. And probably you're still discovering what that journey looks like.
Look, just because I've written a book about it does not mean I've got it all sorted 100%. And I still, I still find that hard at home with my partner. There's a real tendency, I think, in a lot of households to play the, who's got it worse game, I'm not getting enough sleep. Yeah, well, I have to go to work and, deal with this. And, parenting is hard for everyone. And I think one of the things I tried, it became clear to me, and it's in the book, is that we have to, I call it, actively resist some of those defaults if we're going to find a happy medium. So actively resist doesn't mean go on strike at home, but it maybe means be willing to have the awkward conversation, or actively resist the little voice in your head that says, well, I'm the mum, so I have to do this. Or, frankly, I'm the dad, so I have to go and earn the living. Maybe dads can actively resist that voice and say, maybe I could do some part-time. That's an option for our family. But those conversations can be awkward at first, I know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this parenting journey is sometimes overwhelming. But I think what you give to people in the book is that hope. So I think that maybe if there's some parents out there that, they're struggling, they're sleep deprived, there's lots going on in their lives, they're juggling the bouncing ball, so to speak. You offer some really practical strategies to be able to sort of deal with those emotions and deal with those, those feelings of anger and put some practical strategies in place. And I think, if you wouldn't mind, maybe we could discuss maybe a couple of really effective ones that you've found useful to yourself, and those, I know you discuss some of them in the book as well. Yeah,
definitely, and that was really important. That's and what to do about it, part of the title about anger. So for one example, with the sleep experts for sleep, they told me going to bed at the same time every night is actually going to be more helpful than trying to wake up at the same time. Because when you're a parent, you're not necessarily in control of when you get woken up. But one of the things I started doing to try and even out my sleep was put the kids to bed and then pretty much start my bedtime routine and be in bed the same time every night. That means you miss out on a whole lot of other stuff, but you've got to prioritise, right? So that was sort of an interesting example. Another one, I looked in the book at other triggers, and pain is one that I think a lot of people underestimate. So parenting is is manual labour a lot of the time. You know, you're lifting kids in and out of car seats and cots, and you know, if they're having a tantrum, maybe they clock you in the side of the head or something.
Yeah.
So the expert said, don't underestimate the impact that pain can have on sort of chipping away at your threshold. So if you've got a headache, you know, and you've had some water and maybe a coffee or whatever, just take some Panadol. Like, you don't need to soldier on. Yeah. It's like, it's an over-the-counter medication, that's what it's for, and it takes something off your plate and gives you a bit of bandwidth back. But I think we quite often have this notion that, like, oh, I should be able to cope, or, you know, it's not that big a deal. Just help yourself out, you know. And one of the other ones was sort of more of a emotional one, but don't wait so long to ask for help. So a lot of the experts said that they don't actually hear from people until they're basically in crisis, you know. And again, it's that soldiering on mentality of like, oh, parenting, you know, it is hard. Everybody says that they're not getting sleep. Everybody says that they're struggling, that their relationships, you know, on the rocks because of it or whatever. And the longer that we wait to ask for help, the harder it is to kind of get back to some stable ground. And so they all said, like, don't think that it has to be so bad before you might ask for some help.
I think that's a really key one, in my opinion, is asking for help before you get to that point of being overwhelmed to the point of either exhaustion or just complete mental breakdown.
Absolutely, yeah, because then you don't actually have the energy to sort of put in place any of the strategies that people might suggest. It's going to take you a long time to get back there. And unfortunately, I think that's probably what I did. You know, in part of writing this book was maybe that's why I started with the physical, because I kind of had to build myself back up a little bit before I could do some of that more emotional work about, you know, what do I need to be thinking about outside of the immediate, you know, parenting relentlessness. Yeah, no,
absolutely. And thank you for sharing some of those practical strategies with us. And for those that are listening, I'd really encourage you to go and purchase this book. It's definitely very worthwhile. And I think before we go though, Lauren, I know you've been very generous with your time, but we spoke briefly about something before about anger being that emotion, and then with it, a lot of the time it's linked to aggression, or which is an act of acting out that anger. However, you know, you describe the book as being a reassuring, sympathetic look at what is, I guess, a hot topic. You know, what do you hope changes in this broader cultural conversation about this? And if anyone's going to take something from this book, what do you want them to take from it, first and foremost?
Yeah, and I think that's a good place to kind of end our conversation. Before I forget, though, I will say I appreciate you suggesting people buy it. You can also borrow it from your library.
Oh,
so
great.
I really want it to be accessible for people, and so that's definitely something you can do too.
Yeah, awesome. That's awesome. Yeah.
But as far as what I hope it changes about this conversation. So we mentioned at the start that in my day job, I also cover things like family violence and child protection.
Yes. Yeah.
And in writing the book, it became clear to me that link between being angry, that feeling and emotion, and acting on that anger, aggression, is still really strong in most people's minds. And so that is a big part of what stops mums from saying, oh my goodness, like going to their GP, for example, or somebody in a position of authority who might have to report them if they thought there was an issue, and to put their hand up and say, I cannot stop yelling at home, or I smacked my kid the other day, which is still very common, the data shows in Australia. You know, if you've done that, you're not alone. And that happens because parents are overwhelmed most of the time. It's very rarely, you know, there are some horrible cases, but it's very rarely an intentional thing. It's parents who don't have the skills, the time, or the support to sort of find a way out of how they're feeling. And it's because they haven't put their hand up. And so what I would hope is that by making it like more okay to talk about being angry as a parent, and sort of decoupling it from acting on that anger. Like, you know, most parents will probably have had a moment where they have had to leave the room that their children are in because they are so furious that they they don't know what they're going to do. So they go away and they calm down and they come back.
Yeah.
That is perfectly acceptable. There is nothing wrong with that kind of anger. You know, you're not acting on that in a way that's harming your children. And even if you do have an outburst that you worry is going to harm them, it might scare them, or, you know, you might think, oh, they're going to pick up on my behaviour.
Yeah.
The experts and the research is really clear that if you repair after that, then that's also fine. You know, that repair is really important. So the coming back and saying, oh, mummy had some big feelings there, you know, that's not how I wanted to talk to you, and I'm sorry about that. What can we do next time to make sure that doesn't happen? You know, that is fine. Like, that teaches your children a good lesson as well. It teaches them that you're human, that you can apologise, and that you can all move on from it. So I would like to hope that if we can get to a point where talking about that kind of normal stuff is really much more comfortable, then families won't be left without support for so long that it tips over into something that's not okay. You know, because they haven't had enough support and they are acting out physically, or they are sort of emotionally distancing from their children because it's all too much. That's where we have a problem.
That's very interesting and very pertinent that you said what you just said. We're teaching our children to deal with these big emotions, and we'll say, you know, you're not allowed to, you know, act out, or, you know, we'll tell them off if they do, and then we're not actually doing it ourselves. And I think, they do learn by seeing, don't they, a lot of the time. Something that I'm learning, and, you know, we're learning in our parenting journey, is that, you know, we need to deal sometimes with the feelings that we have internally before we can even teach our children how to do it the correct way or the proper way as well.
Absolutely. And there is, you know, there's a real responsibility as parents for us to sort ourselves out. You know, it's not, this book is not about excusing sort of problematic expressions of anger or violence, which I know there are some people who will criticise me for that and sort of saying I'm trying to, like, give people a blanket excuse to be a bad parent. But it's actually the opposite. I'm really trying to say, like, feeling this way is actually a pretty normal response to the circumstances we find ourselves in, this relentlessness of parenting. Feeling this way is okay, and what we should be doing is talking about it so that it's not festering and turning into something that's not okay.
But I think as well, Lauren, in your other career with the Advertiser, in seeing what you're seeing with family violence, you'd be seeing probably the worst case scenarios in doing what you're doing with journalism, and it's you're seeing the worst of the worst, but there's a lot of in between that before you get to that point.
Exactly. And I mean, in those worst cases, it's often because there's a lot of other factors at play. Again, I think intention is actually a small part of it, especially in the sort of cases of, like, child protection and family neglect. I mean, we know with some cases a lot of cases of family violence, that actually does come down to some pretty core beliefs about who's equal in a family. But putting that aside, I think there are a lot of cases where if there had been help earlier, if there had been support, if there had been someone to listen, someone to come around and put a load of washing on and take the baby while you go and have a shower, that can short circuit a lot of stuff that would otherwise fester. And probably part of the spark for writing this book came from being on maternity leave and being away from my day job and thinking, what if I were in that situation? Like, here's my baby screaming in the middle of the night. What if I didn't have anyone that I could ask for help? What if I didn't know that tomorrow I could, you know, pack up the car and go and see my mum and she'd make me a coffee and give me a 5-minute rest? Like, what is the difference between me and some of those families that end up in those other situations?
I think that's very important. I think it's, you've shared a really important message in, I guess, seeking that help when you need it. And it not being taboo. It's okay to seek that help. And I just thought that's probably a really good place to sort of end is, you know, thank you for your time. Thank you for dedicating actually your life to, you know, sharing stories with people. But you've put your own story into this novel. And thank you for doing so. And thank you for sharing some of the insight that you've shared in the book with us today at Uncharted Parenting. And I'm sure our audience will definitely get a lot from it. Can you just maybe say, can we just go over again where you can purchase the book from, just so your the audience can actually go out and do that?
Yeah, sure. So Meltdown, Why Motherhood Makes Us Angry and What to Do About It. Yep. I really would encourage you to see if your local library has it.
Yep.
And it'd be in the physical copy and also the ebooks. Otherwise, you can order it online from wherever you buy books, and it's in plenty of bookstores. As far as I know, I've sort of popped in to see a few on the shelf, which is always fun.
Well, thanks, Lauren, for sharing some of it with us today, and we wish you all the best for the future, and we can't wait to see what the future holds for you. So thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Uncharted Parenting. Remember, you can catch all of your episodes on all of your favorite streaming platforms, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and on Podbean as well. And remember, we want to hear from you guys. So send in your comments, your feedback, all of your questions to podcast@encounteryouth.com.au, and we'll see you in the next episode.